All right, so just very quickly, a quick introduction on Archimedes, and we can get started. At a very high level, Archimedes is a software engineering guild. It's been curated by ThoughtWorks, Accenture, and IBM alums. I'm one of the founding members of the guild. I'm ex-Accenture myself, and I'm currently the CPO and CTO of a health tech company called AcuCardia. The focus of the guild essentially is threefold. One is to enable guild members to engage with each other. The second is to allow them the opportunity to grow and get ahead in their careers, or find opportunities where they can do something entrepreneurial if they so choose. And then the third is the possibility to earn through various mechanisms that the guild enables. I'm not going to go into the guild in much more detail than that right now. In terms of what this series is about, this is an engineering mastermind series that we host. It's supposed to be monthly, but we've had several months in the last quarter or two that we haven't done it, but we've restarted it this quarter and have events lined up for the next quarter. So we will be doing it more consistently moving forward. We try to bring in people that can speak about topics that are of interest to software engineers. We've dealt with topics leading from micro front ends through to microservices, through to high performance databases, how to manage remote teams. So we've covered a gamut of different topics. Next month's event is going to be on WASM. We had a very, very popular talk on WASM about a year ago. So just, for those that don't know what that is, WASM stands for WebAssembly. It's really meant to be a new way of building web applications, at least on the front end, but it's taken off in a lot of different ways from what it was originally intended. So the speaker next month, Mr. Joel Dice, will talk through that. This month we have, obviously, you're here to listen to this, so I'm sure you're interested, but a very interesting topic in terms of generative AI. I let Akshaj introduce himself, but obviously the reason for the interest in generative AI has a lot to do with some of the progress we've seen very recently, starting with the launch of ChatGPT in 3 and 3.5 late last year, and most recently ChatGPT 4 that was released yesterday. So from that point of view, I think most people on this call probably need an introduction in terms of what GPTs are. But let me hand it over to Akshaj, who can deep dive into that and a lot more as far as generative AI is concerned. So Akshaj, up to you now. I'm going to stop my screen share, and you can screen share on your end.
Thanks for the introduction. Let me just share my screen. All right, I'm going to start off with this, right? So what is generative AI? I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone already knows, it's a type of AI that focuses on creating new data from existing underlying data that we have, right? How can you use it? You can use it for efficiency, increasing efficiency in applications, or basically creative stuff as well. Let me give a brief history of how we came to this point, right? In the generative AI landscape of things. So yeah, I mean, it all kind of started in 1940s and 50s ish, when people were just starting off with very simple neural networks in computers. So back then we didn't have generalized computers. So people were making hardware specific neural networks. It was not deep neural networks. You only had one single layer of a perceptron, which was kind of giving you outputs by taking in inputs. So it was kind of a different architecture of a computer, you can say, which was specifically meant to classify things into different categories, right? So that was the perceptron. That was in 1950s, right? And then a bunch of stuff kept on happening throughout the decades. We had the Deep Blue defeating Gary in chess and all that stuff, right? And in the 2010s, we had this new architecture of deep neural networks called GANs. So GANs are essentially able to generate new stuff because essentially it's like two neural networks, one of which is trained on a set of data, right? And the other neural network is just trained to classify whether the data that it is being fed is generated by the first neural network or whether it's like just ordinary data. So essentially, GANs, because of that, are trained to make a model believe that the data it is generating is actual data generated by another like human per se. And that's why like GANs are able to do a lot of like generative stuff. And after all those things, we had like more I would say so different fields have different modes of generation. I'll go more into that depth later on. All right, but okay. So coming to the main slide of this particular presentation, right? So this is like this first presentation was just entirely AI generated presentation, which is why I was kind of like skimming through it. Like I wanted to see how far I could get, like before it just, like blasts on me. So for example, like this slide, it says it's like different types of AI systems. Like these are AI researchers, right? These are not AI systems, as we all probably can see from this image. And why I wanted to like present this particular presentation as the first presentation is just as a precursor to my actual presentation. I want you all to realize that we do have like generative AI, but there are certain like boundaries and limits to it. And we should be like careful while using it. So not only like in ethical terms, but also like sometimes it can just spin up BS, right? I'm pretty sure the timeline I just showed you, which is entirely AI generated as well, it half of it is probably wrong, right? So that's like my first, I would say, like advice. Be very careful when using like generative AI, because a lot of times like it might just generate pure BS out of nowhere, and you would not really notice it unless you really like look deeply into the thing. Uh, Also, I mean, if you guys want to generate your own slides, which are like completely AI generated, go try beautiful.ai. It's really cool. All right, so going on to the main presentation now. Sorry about that. And feel free to like jump in and like ask questions and answers and stuff like that. I'm happy to make this more interactive. Like I'm just a better presenter if it's interactive instead of me just blabbering on and on. Cool. So entering the main topic. So who am I? I'm currently a grad student studying AI at Carnegie Mellon. And previously I've worked in a bunch of startups, some one or two startups as a data scientist, more on the business operations slash strategy side, but have like ML development experience for 5 years now. All right. So in today's like era, we have like mainly two types of generative AI products, right? One is natural language generation. So essentially, these models are more focused on helping you write things, or basically natural language generation of all kinds, right? And I'm going to go more into depth on each of these. So the second one is image generation. These models kind of like generate images or like videos. And examples are like DALI, Stable Diffusion, which you probably have like seen all over the internet before ChatGPT was really like going off, right? So giving a brief overview on like how natural language generation models actually work from the inside, since I know like most of you don't might not have like a deep learning background, right? So essentially these models are fed in large amounts of just text from the internet, right? And how we pre-train them is by giving them sequences of words and then asking them to autofill the rest. So, for example, if I give it like the cat, right, and ask it to autofill it, it might like autofill it with the cat is like moving or something like that, right? So that's how we train them. Like we ask them, we give them sentences, we ask them to autofill it and see how it goes. And we obviously have like a loss function, which essentially calculates the difference between what we wanted to see and what we saw, kind of a thing. And yeah, and basically that's how we train like large language models. So recently, what people have started to do after pre-training them in this way is adding a human feedback loop to these models. So essentially, what people are doing now is, so now I have trained my model to kind of generate words after a sequence of words, right? The next step, which people have started to do, is give it a prompt. For example, if I give it a prompt of like, what does the fox say, right? And then it might generate like woof or like meow or like something else, right? Whatever. And then the human picks up a particular example, like a particular prompt that the model generated, basically out of the options. And based on what the human picked, we basically retrain it. We give it a reward that, okay, so this is the best prompt out of everything that we generated. So that's basically something very new. It was just released in like Jan 22. No, I mean, I think like earlier than Jan 22, but like the first model to kind of do this was either Palm or Instruct GPT. I'm not really sure about the details right now, but yeah, so it's kind of like very new and it's only in a few models. For example, Google's Palm has it. Like Google just integrated it yesterday with all of the different docs and like all the Google Drive stuff that they have, and you can go test it out there. The other thing that people do with natural language generation models is they fine tune them. So if you have a particular task that you want to do, right? So for example, if I am a coder, right, and I want to code stuff, and I want my natural language generation model to only give me code as an output, I can fine tune it on coding data. So in fine tuning, what you essentially do is you give it a prompt and you give it an answer to that. Uh, Both are natural language. So I mean, not in this case, both are not natural language because coding is not natural language, but both are essentially like text or stuff like that, right? And so here I can give it like prompts like generate a HTML code for XYZ, and I can give it the HTML code in the completion phase, and I can basically train it to generate HTML code in this way. So to extract like kind of like its capabilities, people fine tune it to particular tasks. So these are the three things like basically you can do before like actually using your model for inference. So coming to the inference part, like you probably don't have to do this stuff ever. I mean, like except fine tuning maybe or RLHF, like you don't have to do the pre-training. Probably like you'll be using like very, very large scale models which have been already pre-trained by companies by spending like millions of dollars. So unless you're into that business, you'll probably be doing mostly like fine tuning and inference stuff, right? So, I mean, just by this is like just a quick overview. Like, there are many more tools out there, but like these are the ones I really like for natural language generation. So I wanted to put them in here and just showcase like what each one does. If you have questions about like a particular tool, just let me know. We can also like do a more in-depth dive on that particular tool, go to that website, like open up the docs, whatever. So the first one I would like really recommend is Hugging Face. So Hugging Face is like a really large scale open source community in data science. So essentially all open source ML models are kind of like if anyone has a open source ML model to like deploy, right? they store it in Hugging Face. Like it's 100%, almost like 100% guaranteed that like if there is an open source ML model, it will be on Hugging Face. So even OpenAI releases its open source ML models on Hugging Face. So Hugging Face has this huge collection of all the models you can use. Like it has all the open source models, like computer vision models, natural language processing models. The only problem with Hugging Face is, so if you don't want to pay them, it's like free to use, obviously, because everything is open source, right? And if you don't want to pay them, then you will have to like deploy your model on your own, which will include some sort of ML operations, right? Which might be irritating for you or time consuming. So if you don't want to do that, then you can like use the other like ready to use APIs like Anthropic or OpenAI. So OpenAI, obviously, I mean, everyone would know this. Like they have the GPT API, which now also includes ChatGPT. Does not include GPT 4.0 yet. Anthropic, it's a much more stable version of OpenAI's GPT API. So it might not be as good in terms of like doing things, but it's much more stable. So it gives you constraints which it will fulfill, right? So from what I've heard, it dreams up less stuff. So for example, like what my model dreamed on the other slide here, right? Like it was just like, this is all wrong, right? But it thought that it was correct. So Anthropic does not do that. So they are focusing more on creating models which have more safety inbuilt. Basically, your system can be more reliable. And yeah, I mean, OpenAI, I'm pretty sure everyone knows that, but I can give you a brief overview of like what the differences are in GPT-3 versus GPT 3.5. So basically, the main difference between like GPT-3 and 3.5 APIs that's available right now is in GPT-3, you can actually fine tune your model using the OpenAI API. So you can actually make it like work for specific tasks. And for ChatGPT API or like GPT 3.5 API, you cannot do that yet on the OpenAI website. And the other big difference that they have in the API is basically GPT-3 only includes like, GPT-3, you are able to use the basically model in any way you want. You can use it for like classification purposes as well by like fine tuning it for those purposes, like whatever you want to do, right? GPT 3.5, you have to use it in a particular chat ML format. So you cannot like basically go ask questions to the underlying model directly. They have a format which they will then input into the model. So you can only use it in a particular way. So it's kind of like locked to be used in a particular way, whereas GPT-3 API is not. Coming to Llama Index, it's more of an advanced tool. So most LLMs only have 4,000 words of I mean, not most LLMs. Most LLMs probably have like fewer context sizes, but like GPT-3 has 4,000 words of context right now. I mean, GPT 4.0 has 25,000, which might make this a moot point, but let's see. So GPT-3 has like 4,000 words of context size, right? That it can take in, which basically means that it can only take in like 3,000 to 4,000 words at a time, right? It cannot take in more than that. So basically, if you want to give it like a 10,000 word document,
GPT-3 has like,
I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo. Is that just me?
it was for a second. I think it should, I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, cool. Oh, no worries. By the way, does anyone have any questions? I'm like more, I'm like better with interactive stuff. So if you just have like a question, raise your hand.
Yeah, Akshaj. Yeah, Akshaj, actually, when you mentioned Anthropic or like APIs for using LLM, you said it's more stable. what do you mean by more stable? Elaborate that more a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So LLMs have like particular limitations. For example, like this is a very clear example of what a limitation might be, right? Like here, so this whole slide deck was just AI generated, right? So I just gave it 2 words, generate a slide, like 4 words, generate a slide deck on AI, right? Or generative AI, something like that. And it generated the whole slide deck. So this slide, as you can see, is like very clearly dreamed up, or like it's kind of wrong, right? It's showing like AI researchers, and the title is like AI systems, right? Which is very clearly wrong. And GPT 3 or 3.5, like that does it all the time. Like it will go into storylines which do not exist, or like parallel universes which are not there, right? Like it will just spew out wrong stuff. And and sometimes it's so bad that you will never notice that it's wrong until you go in depth and like actually read each word. Like there might just be one sentence in a whole paragraph which is dreamed up or wrong, and everything else sounds correct. So it's very hard to review that. So Anthropic is more stable in the sense that it might not have like the same generative capabilities. Like it might not be as advanced, but I mean, it kind of is as advanced. But in more stable, I mean, it doesn't dream up stuff as often, or it's more reliable. So essentially, like you can rely on it more to be like accurate, right? Like instead of it dreaming up stuff as well. So that's what I basically mean by it being more stable. Does that kind of make sense?
One question on that front. So could be I'm thinking wrong, but when you talk about, or let's take your example, you have put in different, like you mentioned about searching it with 4 words, and it came up with the this solution. So it could be possible that it was fine-tuned, or it was getting so many questions around AI systems or AI researchers that it gave the best possible fitting solution based upon your search or the keywords what you have put in. But if you put in more details, let's say 1,000 words or 100 words, being more specific, what exactly do you need out of that system? So I'm sure the result would have been much more refined and to the point which you were looking for, isn't it?
Yeah, that's definitely correct. The only constraints on that is, so there are two or three things on that, right? So the first one is, as I said, so LLMs, like they have limited context sizes. So in a go, you can only give it like 4,000 words, right? And you can't really give it more than that. Like it will not, like, basically it will generate general stuff then. So if you have like a 10,000 page document and you want to summarize it all, you cannot do that. I mean, now you can do that with GPT-4. I'm just excluding that from this presentation because it's an exception to almost everything. But yeah, so you
Okay.
cannot like give it 25,000 words and
Yeah, I believe
ask
I
it
got
to
your
do
point over
stuff.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Akshaj. I think you answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, basically deriving off of that point as well. So the thing was, okay, people were kind of like fed up with just giving GPT-3 or like other LLMs just 4,000 words, right? So a bunch of people got together and they made Llama Index, also known as GPT Index. They just changed their name to Llama Index super recently because Llama is open source and GPT is not, right? And essentially what Llama Index does is it's a library, it's an open source library which gives you basically different data structures for and ways to feed more context into your models, basically LLMs, right? So if you want to, so for example, one of the things it can do is if you have like a 20,000 word document, it will create vectors of that document. I'll just briefly go through what vectors are. So essentially in LLMs, what you can also do, like one of the use cases for LLMs is you can convert words into matrix of numbers, essentially. So if you have like 1,000 words, you can just convert them into like a matrix of 200 numbers or something like that. It's kind of like a dimensionality reduction technique. And the output of that is called embeddings. So what Llama Index, like one of the features it has is it converts documents into embeddings or vectors, right? And essentially, then what it does is if you have a query, right, for GPT, it will give you similarity scores between different embeddings. So if I have like 100-page document, it will pick out 2 or 3 different pages which are actually relevant to my query first, and then input them into the model so that the model can actually have relevant information and answer it using that. So that's like one of the kind of use cases of Llama Index. It essentially allows you to use larger data with LLMs, like larger data than, let's say, just 4,000 words, right? And LangChain is essentially, it's more for prompt engineering and composability. It's also an open source tool. You can go check it out. And essentially what LangChain does is it allows you to validate your output, your LLM's output. So it essentially makes sure that, okay, so if you want like a SQL as an answer, right? Like SQL query as an answer, it will make sure that the model output is an SQL query, either by prompt engineering or by essentially using rules on the output to extract the relevant information. So, I mean, giving a quick example here. So, if you ask ChatGPT to give like the SQL for an average of some table, right? What it will do is it will be like, here is the SQL query, right? And then S2 and then select whatever, right? The SQL query will start. The problem with that is like if you're making a whole product and every time the English part comes up, right, you don't know what to do with it. Like LangChain will solve that for you. So LangChain will essentially ensure that the output format is in a particular way that you want it to be. And any questions about like natural language generation or the tools I just talked about? Because the next slide is like stable diffusion and stuff like that. So, all right. So how does image generation work, right? So right now, I mean, stable diffusion models, they are trained to essentially reduce images, the input images to noise. So basically, they reduce images progressively to random noise, just like Gaussian noise, like basically nothing at all, right? And then it is trained to regenerate the image from noise back to the actual image, like progressively by denoising it. So we don't have to go into the details, but if anyone has questions here, happy to answer on this topic. And essentially, this is how like the model learns to generate images. It just starts generating stuff from noise. So that's how kind of like stable diffusion works under the model. And again, like giving out some basic tools for image generation out here. Hugging Face is like definitely the one thing which is like across CV and NLP, like all the models, open source models are available on Hugging Face and you can use them whenever you want. Then we have DALI API, which is basically a text to image model by OpenAI, also available in a API format. And we have Dream Studio, which is actually the API for stable diffusion models. So this one is by the creators of stable diffusion models. And then Runway ML essentially allows you to do like a lot of video generation and video adaption or like image in painting, like a lot of video processing stuff. It have like really, really cool features. Like, I mean, you can do like time lapses, like you can do a lot of different video stuff without actually having to use a camera at all. So Runway ML for video is like definitely worth checking out. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much it from my side. I was like expecting more questions and stuff like that, but happy to answer like questions about ML operations or like how you can like productionize these things or any specific use cases as well.
So, sorry.
Yep. The stable diffusion is mainly, we're talking about text to image conversion, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. And between the language models and the GANs, what do you see as a combinational model? I would say. Do you know any model which actually combines both text and image? Okay, the transformer model, of course, but have you seen a combination of GAN with transformer models?
So GANs which use transformers, I'm pretty sure there are some out there. Like GANs have not. So for the past, like I guess like 2 to 3 years, GANs have basically not been the most, I would say, like useful generative models that have come out, right? Like the thing with natural language processing is mask models have overtaken everything else. So, I mean, the example I just gave, right? Like models which you pre-train by basically telling them to generate words, they have overtaken everything else. So they have kind of like by default become the best models, and people like training GANs on NLP, like it's they have just shown like worse results than these mask filling models. And on the other side, like for images, GANs were like really popular for a while, but stable diffusion like really just like blew everything out of the water. To be honest, like it was just way better. And with like new adoptions of stable diffusion, for example, like you can probably search on the internet, like it's ControlNet. And ControlNet, what it does is it kind of allows you to basically do image generation in a way which is conditioned to particular stuff. So if you only want to generate sketches, you can do that. If you only want to generate like images in a particular style, you can do that. So GANs have like kind of fallen out of favor after like mask filling NLP models and like also stable diffusion, I would say. So yeah, I'm not really that familiar with the current like GAN literature as well because of this.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, probably I think the next presentation or so, hoping they, is conducting a seminar on that, probably covering the architecture, that might give a little more understanding on the stable diffusion models and yeah.
Yes, I was not really sure how many ML people would be on the call versus like how many software engineers are on the call, right? So I didn't want to like fill my whole slides with training architectures and how you train models because that would be like, yeah, too much information and just like one go. But yeah, I mean, happy to like send over some stuff which I have on like actual stable diffusion architecture, like just slides. Like, yeah, I mean, those are like really good slides. And happy to send it over to like,
yeah, that'll be good.
I can send it to Sadik. Can you send it to people on the call? I guess. How do I do that? I mean, I'll just we'll talk later, I guess. Sure, I can take the question from Amit. Do you have a question?
Hi, yes, I have one question, small
Yeah, I
question
think
actually.
Amit has a question, right? Sorry, Amit, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. My question basically is you mentioned that there are issues comes in terms of like deployment when you use Hugging Face modules. Could you give a little bit more detail on that? Is it more software compatibility that those modules depends on, or what's the
Oh no, so what I meant by
background?
issues was just like, I mean, it's kind of like cumbersome and time consuming to deploy like ML models on your own versus like just using an API, right? Which already serves the ML models. So it's not like a issue per se. You can still deploy them. There are a lot of like production level things though. So one particular thing is that it might be much more expensive for you to deploy your own model unless like it's super optimized. So for example, like these OpenAI APIs, like they are very, very compute optimized, and that's why they are able to serve you for like the amount that they are able to serve you for, right? Which might not be the same case if you deploy your own GPUs on an AWS like cluster or something like that, right? So it's basically like, yeah, they have like already done software optimizations for you under the hood and stuff like that. So it will be much cheaper. And obviously you don't have to like do all the DevOps stuff, which you would have to do otherwise. But I mean, yeah, I've done that before. Like it's I've deployed like Hugging Face models before, because the thing with deploying like open source models versus using these APIs out of the box is you can fine tune them much more. So if you actually have ML expertise on your team, and if you have some data that you want to use with your model, I mean, ideally, I would like fine tune them and deploy my own
Yeah.
model instead of like using pre-trained models, because even like very recent research has shown that ChatGPT can be easily outperformed on tasks if you like it was outperformed on 14 out of 16 tasks if you just fine tune other models on those particular tasks. So it's like, yeah, I mean, large models are not built to basically beat everything all at once.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Cool. I can take the question from Jishnu, I guess.
Hi, Akshaj. So,
Okay.
it's a bit of a loaded question, but up until now, all of this research, AI research, has been mostly open source. But with models coming from bigger and larger companies, they're going more and more closed source. How do you see the space evolving, and how does that affect business and people in general? In your perspective.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's like a very good question. It's a more philosophical one for sure. Personally, I think that so I mean, from what I see, like stable diffusion is still like very much, it's very open source, right? Uh, Across the industry, I've only seen like open AI basically mostly close sourcing its models. Not saying that's anything bad, right? But I mean, by doing that, they have been like, they've gotten like very good funding, right? Like they've been able to like get $10 billion from Microsoft, and like they are the ones basically driving the LLMs right now. I feel like at least like other companies are still releasing GPT-3 and GPT 3.5 versions of their products, and OpenAI is already like on GPT-4, and GPT-4 is just like it's mind blowing. Like especially as a AI researcher, I mean like it's just insane what that thing can do. And going forward, I mean, I do feel better about the fact that OpenAI at the end of the day is like a non-profit at its heart. And even the deal that they have made with Microsoft will only last until they reach a certain amount of revenue, which might or might not come true someday because it's like $10 billion, right? But I mean, I believe that when the thing with Microsoft might end, they might actually open source the models, right? And going on to a different tangent here, but there are like other concerns as well, right? Like with open sourcing models, for example, what if you open source a model and like some country uses it for something that is not very good, right? And I'm not going to list like specific countries here, but what if like the US gets beat in a tech race, right? So that could happen if you open source everything and people can use it freely, right? So like there are a lot of considerations. I mean, I try not to think about it as long as the decisions are not in my hands. So yeah, that's how I put it.
That's really
Yeah, I have a couple of things. One is, I know when we originally spoke, you mentioned there are some apps that you built, for example, the cover letter app. Is it possible to show like maybe a quick demo of that? If we can.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, why not? So that was like a really quick side project. I like built this in like I think 1 day or even less, but it was really fun. Quick traction on it as well, so that's nice. So right, so this is like a quick cover letter generator that I built. So essentially, you just like upload your resume here, right? Give me a second. So in the past week, so I built this in like less than a day, and in the past week, we have been able to like get 1,000 users for it, and over like 100 daily active users till now. So the minimum has been 100 daily active users, so that's nice. But it's a pretty simple app. Like it doesn't do anything like extraordinary. So essentially, what you do is like you kind of input your resume here, right? Like I did just now. Then you enter your name, the job you're applying for, the company you're applying for, right? And what the job requirements are. You can also like copy paste the job requirements from the job description, and then you just hit submit, right? And then it takes some time for the model to run on the background, and then it kind of generates like cover letters for jobs. So let me just wait for this to happen.
So what is it?
Doesn't take this long.
Is it using something like your GPT?
So right now I'm using the GPT API plus like prompt engineering and some processing on the PDF, and like also taking all this into account, right? So basically like GPT index kind of stuff with like resume and job requirements and APIs to generate this, right? So I mean, for example, here, I mean, I've always found it to be like really useful, and it takes like a lot of like stuff from the resume as well. So I mean, I can just read it out really quick. So dear hiring manager, I'm writing to express my interest in the EIR position at Entrepreneur First. As an individual with a passion for entrepreneurship, I believe that my experience and skills make me an ideal candidate for this role. So this one, like it takes this from like my resume, right? Like as a founder in residence previously, I have conducted customer interviews, developed product roadmaps, and secured customers for software solutions. So the really cool thing about this that I found out was like it was like taking stuff from my resume. Like my academic background includes an MS in AI from CMU and bachelor's of engineering, and like it was like interweaving that into like the cover letter, which was really cool. So I was like, I mean, I tried like a bunch of prompt engineering around that and did stuff around that, and then I was like, yeah, I mean, why not like make a quick website out just using like Gradio. So Gradio is like very easy to kind of like just simple UI like this, right? Take in a bunch of inputs and serve an output, and I just served it through an like EC2 instance, bought like a domain name and just served it. And yeah, it's been working pretty good for the last week. Now the only issue is like how do I monetize it? Right.
Yeah. So the other thing that comes to mind, and especially I don't know if you saw the GPT-4 demo from yesterday, where literally, the guy wrote something on a napkin, showed it to like visually showed it, I think, right? And it was able to generate a website off of that. Not the prettiest looking website, but it was still like leaps and bounds ahead of maybe what was possible, even a very short time back. So just a question, right? Maybe more of a philosophical question similar to Jishnu's, but for all these years, I think, software engineers, developers have always thought that they'd be the last persons outside of maybe pure creatives to lose their jobs, but ironically, I think people in the service industry, drivers, they will probably still, like autonomous cars, for example, right? It's autonomy is possible in certain contexts today, but for autonomous cars to truly take off all over the world, it's going to be decades, right? For many reasons, not just tech, but many, many reasons. But if someone is just, a very sort of verbatim coder, right, that takes requirements, converts it to code, that's all they do. They don't think about the larger problem, nothing, right? I think they are much, much higher risk right now of being potentially, in some sense, not being in a difficult position to find a job than somebody that is driving an 18-wheeler. It's ironic that that's happened, but that's kind of where it looks like it's going, right? Like for all these profession that people assumed would be relatively safe, right? Coding is a big thing now in schools around the world. It just seems to be, it'll at some level seems to be, it'll probably get to a point where it's irrelevant, right? The higher level problem solving, of course not, but the coding piece of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, my personal take on that is, I mean, also quoting a bunch of more people here, right? Like people with AI will replace like people instead of like AI replacing people, and that's mostly because of the stability factor of it. Like that's what I feel, right, will happen. At least for 10 years. I mean, maybe 10 years later we have like a fully autonomous thing, which can like actually code stuff. But right now, like the amount of like stuff it just dreams up, or like you always need like a kind of like a manager to oversee it, right? Which can actually read code as well. So the overall implication, I feel like, at least in an economical sense, is it will improve efficiency by a lot, like by a lot, right? And now, like that can lead to two things, right? Like that can either lead to people losing jobs because efficiency is more and there is like less number of like people required for a particular job. Or the second thing could be we just start building more products, right? Like we could have like solopreneurs, like every second person could be a solopreneur, right? And releasing their own products. And honestly, like, I mean, that could be our future, right? Like just individual people releasing products and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I would be happy to see that. I'm not sure if that is the future, but like it could be.
The long term, you're probably right. But the issue with that is, there's two issues with that. One is building products, at least, for people on this call and people that I generally interact with, has not been much of an issue. Like software engineers know how to build products, right? Like they've known that for a while. The issue that you run into is distribution, and that is not a problem that most developers are thinking about, right? So building a product is not the hard part. It's how does that product then get to be to a point monetizable? You were able to build the cover letter app in one day. How do you monetize it? That's going to take you a year to figure out, right? So I don't think building the products. So
yeah, I mean, that's how like maybe AI has shifted that paradigm, right? Like because I mean earlier even building like it's like how cloud shifted the paradigm. It was like building companies is like, so tech companies was super hard because you can't really have your own instances lying around, right? You have to buy all the hardware. Like cloud enabled that. Like AI has enabled people to like do a lot more stuff. Like it has just made people more efficient if used in the right way. So I mean, definitely like people with AI will replace people without AI, but like how is that impacting the economy? Will it like create more products? Like what's gonna happen? I'm not really sure. Like no one really knows, to be honest. But I mean, that's how like Wall Street people make their money, right? By
Yeah,
predicting
I
stuff.
know it's interesting because the last time a big shift like this happened in some sense in terms of how technology was built, the only comparable example in the last 20 plus years was outsourcing, where suddenly you had an influx of people that could write code in a totally different part of the world that became available to the West. And the impact of that was definitely, if nothing else, a redistribution of wealth, right? Whereas now it's perhaps even more impactful than that. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But if sort of gut instinct just says it's going to get, it's going to be choppy before we figure out how to play in this world, right? Because it is going to be, like, you're right, ultimately it does result in anybody being able to build whatever they want to, but at the same time, you then have to think about, right, if what you're building is valuable, and how do you then monetize on it. So those are skills that are not necessarily taught today all that much. That's the challenge. At least coding is being taught, whereas the skills around creativity and even sales and marketing are relatively less taught, right? Particularly in schools and things like that. So anyways, it's a different topic altogether, but just wanted your initial thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I do think like product is one of the things that's like not gonna be replaced by AI for sure. Like product is gonna become like more and more important.
Yep.
But yeah, it was really nice, like talking to everyone here. Yeah.
No worries. I think it was my total mess up on the live stream, but I think it will. The main thing for us, actually, to be very honest, with this mastermind is the recording and then putting it up on YouTube, which is where it gets a lot more views. So, hopefully we'll get it up there in relatively soon, and I'll let you know if there are questions, comments coming out of there. But in general, we appreciate the time, appreciate your thoughts on this. And as Naveen said, we may plan another session for later in the year or something that's more in depth from like an AI perspective and an architectural perspective, because I know someone like Naveen thinks about that all the time.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Good luck with everything, and look forward to speaking in the future as well.